Emma Blake stood in the bio lab sorting samples when the emergency alarm echoed through the research station, and her hands froze over the microscope as Commander Helen Mars announced an unknown vessel had sent a distress signal requesting immediate assistance, and all personnel needed to report to their stations. Within minutes, their lock hissed open. 2 hours later, and Emma watched from behind the medical team as they brought the survivor through, and she was tall, so incredibly tall, with skin that shimmered like polished silver under the station lights, and her eyes glowed with a soft violet luminescence that made Emma catch her breath and wonder the alien woman collapsed before reaching the medical bay, and Emma rushed forward without thinking and caught her before she hit the floor, and their hands touched skin to skin, and something passed between them like electricity or recognition or both. And those violet eyes locked onto Emma's green ones with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. Kirasha was her name, and Emma learned it 3 days later, when the alien woman finally woke in the medical wing, and she spoke in melodic tones that the translation device struggled to interpret, but Emma sat beside her bed every day learning the sounds and rhythms of her language, while teaching her English words in return. They started with simple things like colors and numbers and foods, but soon moved to deeper concepts like dreams and fears and hopes for the future, and Emma found herself sharing things she had never told anyone about: why she left Earth, and how lonely the stars could be despite being surrounded by crew members who called themselves friends. Kirasha listened with those luminous eyes, never judging, only understanding, and she shared her own story in halting English mixed with her native tongue. And Emma pieced together that she was running from something on her homeworld, something about duty and arranged bonds and expectations that felt like chains around her heart-sized hearts, plural, because Valorian people had to. And Emma found that beautiful somehow, that this elegant being had twice the capacity for feeling that humans possessed, and maybe that explained the intensity Emma felt whenever they were in the same room together. Weeks passed, and they fell into a rhythm of meeting in the observation deck after Emma's shift ended, and Kirasha would already be there waiting by the large viewport, watching distant stars spin in the darkness, and Emma would bring 2 cups of tea, and they would sit together in comfortable silence until one of them found words worth breaking into. Me, Carson noticed first, because she was Emma's closest friend and also security officer, which meant she noticed everything, and she cornered Emma in the corridor one morning with concerned eyes, asking if Emma understood what she was doing spending so much time with their guest. Emma did not have a good answer because she did not fully understand it herself, only that being near Kirasha felt right in a way nothing else ever had. And Amy sighed and squeezed her shoulder and told her to be careful, because interspecies complications could get messy fast. Complications arrived on a Tuesday morning when Amy burst into the lab with a data pad showing encrypted transmissions she had intercepted, and Valorian warships were searching the sector looking for someone important, and the descriptions matched their guest's perfect. Emma felt her stomach drop as she read the messages and realized Kirasha had not told her everything, and she found the alien woman in her usual spot by the viewport and asked quietly why she never mentioned being royalty. Kirasha turned with tears gathering in those violet eyes, making them shine even brighter, and she explained in careful English that she was the eldest daughter of the Valorian High Council, and her family had arranged for her to bond with a military commander from a rival house to secure peace, and she could not do it, could not spend her life with someone chosen by politics. Rather than her heart, Emma wanted to reach for her, wanted to comfort her, but Helen Mars appeared behind them, clearing her throat and requesting both of them in her office immediately, and Emma knew this conversation was about to get much worse. The commander's office felt too small with all of them inside, and Helen spoke in her formal voice about galactic treaties and diplomatic relations, and how the peace between humans and Valorians depended on good faith and mutual respect, and harboring a runaway princess without informing her people could be seen as an act of aggression. Kira stood tall despite her fear and stated clearly that she had asked for sanctuary, and under galactic law the station had to grant her request. But Helen shook her head and explained that law only applied to refugees fleeing persecution, not royalty avoiding family obligations. Emma felt anger rise in her chest, and she asked Helen if forcing someone into an unwanted bond did not count as persecution, and the commander gave her a sharp look and told her this was not her decision to make and she needed to step back and let the adults handle diplomatic matters. That stung worse than Emma expected, and she left the office without another word and spent the rest of her shift running useless tests on samples she had already analyzed. And when Amy found her later, Emma was crying over a microscope and could not seem to stop. Amy held her while she sobbed and did not say anything about how she had warned her this would happen, and Emma was grateful for that small mercy. And when she finally calmed down, Amy told her the Valorian ships would arrive in 3 days and Karasha would leave, and maybe it was better this way before things got more complicated. But Emma could not accept that, and she found Karasha in her quarters that night, and the alien woman looked smaller somehow, sitting on the edge of her bed with her silver skin dimmed and her eyes no longer glowing bright. And Emma sat beside her and took her hand and asked what she wanted, not what her family wanted or what politics demanded, but what would make her happy. Karasha looked at their joined hands and whispered that she wanted to stay here with Emma, and she had never felt this way before, not in all her long years. And her people lived much longer than humans, which made Emma both special and precious, and she could not bear the thought of leaving and never seeing her again. Emma kissed her then, without planning to, and Karasha made a surprised sound that turned into something softer. And they held each other as the station hummed around them, and Emma realized she was in love with this alien woman, and the impossibility of it did not matter, because the feeling was real and true, and worth fighting for. Next to days passed in a blur of stolen moments and quiet touches, and Emma tried not to think about the warships getting closer, or the fact that Helen had restricted Karasha to her quarters, or that Amy kept giving her pitying looks in the corridors. On the third day, the Valorian fleet arrived in impressive formation, and Emma stood in the docking bay with the rest of the crew watching the delegation come aboard. And they wore elaborate robes and carried themselves with the bearing of people used to being obeyed without question. Karasha emerged from her quarters in ceremonial dress that made her look like she belonged in a palace, not on a research station. And Emma's heart broke a little seeing her like this, so far removed from the woman who laughed at Emma's terrible jokes and got excited about Earth music. The head of the delegation spoke in formal tones about duty and honor and the importance of family bonds, and how the princess needed to return home immediately to fulfill her obligations. And Emma watched Karasha's face go blank and empty, like she was shutting down piece by piece. But then Karasha stepped forward and her voice rang clear through the docking bay as she declared in both Valorian and English that she claimed Emma Blake as her chosen bondmate under the ancient laws of her people, and such a declaration could not be refused or undone by any authoritative. Silence that followed was deafening, and Emma could not breathe, could not think, could only stare as Karasha crossed the space between them and took both her hands and asked in a whisper if Emma would accept her bond, if Emma would choose her despite everything. It would mean Emma said yes without hesitation, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff and flying at the same time, and Karasha pulled her close, and the Valorian delegation erupted in heated debate, but the laws were clear and sacred, and even they could not break them without bringing shame on their entire civilization. Helen looked stunned, but not entirely displeased, and she stepped forward to address the delegation and explain that Emma was a valued member of her crew, and if the princess had chosen her, then the station would support that choice and defend it if necessary. If negotiations took ours, but eventually the Valorians had no choice but to accept the bond, and Karasha would be removed from the line of succession, but allowed to remain on the station with Emma, and they would serve as a diplomatic bridge between their two peoples. Amy hugged Emma so hard she could barely breathe and whispered that she was either very brave or very stupid, and probably both. And Emma laughed and cried at the same time and could not stop smiling. The bonding ceremony happened a week later with both human and Valorian traditions woven together, and Emma wore a simple white dress while Karasha wore robes that shimmered with colors Emma had no names for, and they exchanged vows under the stars. Visible through the observation deck, Vuperthelen officiated with surprising warmth, and Amy stood as Emma's witness, while a young Valorian diplomat stood for Kirasha. And when they sealed the bond with a kiss, the small crowd cheered, and Emma felt more at home than she ever had. Oh,